Hey, good morning, everybody. So one of my strengths when it comes to creating stuff is looking for patterns in the universe. And so I've always been a creator, inventor, totally proactive. Not everybody appreciated what I had to offer. They kind of want to keep me in a little pigeonhole. And when you have so many ideas that you want to put out there, and working for certain companies that are very narrow in how they do stuff, they don't want creators, they just want widgets. So I always look for patterns. And so after we have now explored everything, okay, and I got off the activism, I understood the whole vaccine argument because, yeah, I mean, the vaccines came about on the heels of the plague. The plague came first when we're looking at the history of the human race. And so let me cycle back even beyond or before the plague. Humans have been around for hundreds, thousands, say millions of years, and there has been resets. There has been the fall of the Roman Empire. There was, I guess, Atlantis. There was the Inca empires, all these different empires, the Mongols, okay? And I was listening to some videos last night about the bubonic plague and how that came to be. And how that became such a fast-moving plague was the fact that Genghis Khan created very awesome trade routes to where he connected the East and the West. And with those trade routes, he was still expanding territory. And then where he stopped, where he was like, no more, where it slowed him down was when he got hit by the bubonic plague. Now, I've heard that it came from Russia area, and then it hit the Mongols. And then the Mongols, and they were in an area called Kava, and it's a region somewhere way to like the west when they were expanding their territory. And they were actually catapulting the bodies of the people that were afflicted by the plague into the communities of the areas that they were trying to take over. So he actually not only created trade routes and created amazing business and connecting the East and West together, but he also started the germ warfare. Okay, so holy shit. And so that was like in the, the 1300s, and then the 1300s to the 1500s is when the plague was doing stuff. Hey, Tiffany. And so, but how it traveled so fast. Now we hear stories about how it was the rats. Yes, we hear that rats and the fleas, the biting, but how it transmitted so fast, because we have animals like rats and things that have all the like plague, because we hear about mice having plague, but we're not having the bubonic plague, though they have vaccines ready for LA, because LA seems to be going to be on that next pandemic because of all the homeless. But rats or animals having all these different diseases are not going to transmit to humans as quick as it happened, where not 15 million, but 75 to 200 million people actually died. 1/3 of Europe were afflicted by the plague. It was because of human-to-human contact. It was the actual body lice. No, it's not armadillos. No, just stop. Don't interject. Okay, let me just get through this. Okay, Tiffany, I appreciate, but I don't want to be distracted and having to respond. Okay, but here's the thing. So it's human-to-human contact, and that's why you see the flu season. It's human-to-human contact that is what creates pandemics. Whether it's the flu season or a pandemic of the flu, or it's like, chickenpox, measles, whatever, okay? And so back in the 1300s, they didn't have vaccines back then. And so these are the arguments. These are the arguments of the anti-vaxxers, is that the vaccines cause the pandemics, the vaccines cause all these different things, but the vaccines weren't created back when Genghis Khan was expanding his territory, okay? Because I mean, you have, the people weren't like connected. I mean, they were, but they weren't. But when you have invaders from another country going in and invading and expanding and taking over, raping and pillaging, you're going to bring all of the things that you were exposed to in your environment, because you already adapted to your environment. So when you already adapt to your environment, you're not going to have any adverse reactions to your environment because you've adapted. But when you have bacteria and viruses and parasites in a specific environment, and it's already quarantining because you're not going and visiting other tribes, and then you go and invade an area that has a stronger virus, a stronger bacteria, you're going to pick it up and then you're going to be afflicted by it. And that's what happened in Genghis Khan. Through his marauding days, okay, you know, the huge steppe that he was living on in Mongolia, they adapted to that environment. They were pretty hardy people. But when they started expanding, they were exposed to different peoples with different communicable diseases. And then they fell ill. And then what happened was they fell ill because they didn't have a strong body to be able to transition. Well, they didn't have the vaccines back then, but their bodies were not, they were strong, but they didn't know how to adapt to that new bug, parasite, bacteria. And so then what happened was they all fell ill. It spread throughout the camp. And so their last hurrah was to then take their dead bodies that had all the bacteria and had the pestilence in it, and they catapulted it into some of the European communities. And then this is what then started the Black Plague. Okay. And it wasn't the rats. The rats, yes, they were saying it, but now there's some new information that said actually it was human pestilence. It was humans that passed it to each other. Because when humans get sick, they mutate that strain and they give it to another human. So so that's why the strong people, that's why people survive these human resets, or we'd be extinct. If pestilence was really going to wipe out everybody, then we'd all be extinct. But what does the pestilence wipe out? They wipe out the weak ass people. Okay? They wipe out the weak people. So that's why 1/3 of Europe fell to the bubonic plague. Okay? And there were politics around, which I knew, because anytime something happens, I'm just looking at today's society and what we are exhibiting today as far as politics. We have the religious people using the Bible and saying it's God that is punishing each group whenever a virus comes in and decimates a specific group. Okay? They had people back in, in the 80s when the AIDS came and said it was a punishment on a certain population. And then we have different pestilence happen like in Africa, and pandemics happen in all different countries, and people are laying blame and saying it's God doing whatever, or it's the end days, or they're blaming like the anti-vax people or the pro-vax people, or they're blaming the government or biotech. Okay? It wasn't that different back then. Though they had the church, they had the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope, government officials, and different cultures like the Jews were being blamed for bringing this bubonic plague. Like they were trying to figure out where the hell this thing came from and who were they going to blame, because they didn't know their own body, and they were like so like in their bubble. But when you bring in, when another culture from another environment, such as like, let's say Florida or Africa or parts of the Mediterranean where there's more of an aggressive environment, and then there's climate change going on too, okay? Because the earth goes through its waves of climate change. It just does. The ebb and flow of the glaciers, the atmosphere, and we can all blame that, oh, it's the cars, or it's you're using, this plastic. I mean, we have really like so many things that we're blaming for climate change, for the plague, for cancer, disease, and chronic illness. Because guess what? Cancer, disease, and chronic illness is no different than the plague. But it's more in a controlled circumstance because we have vaccines and we have modern medicine to help us kind of prolong our life. But imagine if we didn't have modern medicine, imagine if we didn't have vaccines, how many people would actually succumb to cancer? Because back then, people were reproducing. They were having children. They were getting old. Okay? Aging is cell degradation. It's when the body weakens because of the fact that they're not absorbing the minerals and the nutrients. Okay? And you can look at all the different diseases that were going on back in the 13th century in Europe as well as any other place. I'm sure Genghis Khan, they had their own sicknesses. I'm sure China, the Jin dynasty back in the 1300s had their own sicknesses, but not enough to decimate 1/3 of their population because they were all in a bubble until then Genghis Khan brought in great trade. He connected the East and West and created trade routes, the Silk Road, that gave people a lot more opportunity and a lot more options. However, you know, no good deed goes unnoticed or whatever. But there is, you take the good with the bad. So right now, we are so global, okay? Not that we weren't global back in the 80s, not that we weren't global back in the 70s, but you're seeing now, you know, because I'm thinking like, you know, humanity, it seems like we were starting from scratch only a couple of 100 years ago. When you think about the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Industrial Age was like you know, the infancy of America. We're not that old. We're so young. Okay, America is so young. Europe has so many years upon us. They've gone through those different fluctuations. Okay, and so we're, you know, people that actually survived the European way came over to America, and all the strong people came to America because they are to survive, you know, these conditions of building a nation. It takes a strong population to build a nation. But what weakened our nation was reproducing. Okay? Because even though, you know, so the people that survived the pandemic of the 1400s, and then they created the vaccines, the smallpox vaccine back in 1796. So that kind of helped strengthen the population too, to be able to have a nice transition when somebody from the Silk Road came in with some kind of disease. They were able to kind of have a nice groundwork laid to help them transition and adapt to the new conditions of new people coming into their territory. Okay, so if you survived the pandemic back then, and you also have the vaccines, and then you're tired of the crown, you know, oppressing you and stopping you from practicing your religion, people on the Mayflower, they were strong ass, hardy people to be on the Mayflower, to then come to America and fight the Indians and take over and learn how to adapt to a new climate, and then fight the British who are coming here trying to then take over us. I mean, that's a strong ass population. Okay, and then to build America on top of that, create the steel, you know, railroads and you know your history. You can look at your history, American history, those of you that are American. Okay, so we had some strong ass folks. I'm looking at my husband. I'm looking at him like, God, you look like a musketeer. Or you look like some, you know, Yankee soldier, because he's just so, like, he has that very strong masculine face. Like his back is just like, he's built like a brick shit house. He'll kick ass. My husband can kick ass. But that's how America was created, was on the backs of the very strong people that left Europe, that survived the crap in Europe and came to America and wanted to build a new life. And it took very strong. But what's weakened America and why we have all this cancer, disease, and chronic illness is the fact that we are reproducing. And yes, we are a melting pot of people coming from all over the world, coming into our nation, bringing all of their, and that's why they had Ellis Island to quarantine you so they don't decimate a population. Okay, they quarantine you for a certain amount of time, and then they release you into then New York. And then there's the tenement square, and you can look at the history of back in, you know, the 1800s, 1900s, the 1900s, when America started really building, the industrial age, when that happened. Okay, And so then they already had the vaccines figured out. And there wasn't an issue with vaccines back then because they knew that people were dying from preventable diseases. They knew that if you took somebody that had no resistance to a very specific bug or bacteria, and they were exposed to it, they had to have something in their body, a little bit of antibodies, to help fight off some aggressive foreign object, okay? So here's the thing. So people forget their history. They are dealing with counter disease and chronic illness, which is no different than what was going on back in the 1300s when Europe was dealing with the plague. We are blaming Monsanto. We are blaming the chemtrails. We are blaming the government. We are blaming the pro-vaxxers, the anti-vaxxers. We are blaming specific cultures like the Hispanics coming from the South. I mean, we are actually repeating history. But we have different politics, but it's the same stuff. Yeah, we have cell phones now. And back then they had cows and messengers on horses, but that's no different. That's no different. People were working with what they had back then, but you can't stop an aggressive message like a virus if you don't build up your resistance within your body. And they had no resistance in their body. So guess who fell ill? It was the elderly and the weak. And I'm sure those that did drugs and were partying a lot. Because I'm sure alcohol was prevalent back then. And then they were hanging out with their farm animals too. But the ones that survived were strong. So in a lot of ways, pandemics are the way that the earth cleanses the weak people off the earth. And right now, at this point in our society, okay, in our society right now today, we're repeating history. I mean, it was so plain as day when I actually posted, when I looked at the politics of the Black Plague, and then I'm looking at the anti-vax argument, the pro-vax argument, and then all these different drugs, you know, the cannabis people and the ones that want all these holistic remedies are no different than what's out there. And we're dealing with weak bodies at this point because we have been procreating on highly traumatized bodies for the last 300 years. Okay, so when you think about it, what is it? 2019, 18, 17. Okay, so 300 years from when the vaccines were first, actually 1796. So yeah, 200 years is when the vaccines have been in existence. Okay, and they created the smallpox vaccine because, and I don't know why, but I'm looking at then the Cherokees and Andrew Jackson and then the whole Trail of Tears. I'm like, oh, okay. There's a connection there somewhere. Though I don't know for sure if the reason why they created the smallpox vaccine was because the fact that Andrew Jackson used, I don't know if it was intentional or if it was just the fact that it just so happened that there was a pandemic of smallpox and it happened to get on the blankets, then it happened to get into the Indian population. I don't know, but they created the smallpox vaccine for a reason because obviously that was probably one of the biggest bacterias back then. And then what happens is humans still are exposed to animals and each other. Okay, they're still exposed to different people from different regions of the earth, bringing their environment with them. Okay, when you are living, like say in the Bahamas, or living in some place like Jamaica or China or Russia, and you've been exposed to bacteria that you've already adapted to, it's no big deal, no different. You are exposed to a bacteria that you've adapted to. And then you go into a community like, say, like an island in the middle of the Atlantic, okay? And these people have no resistance to the bacteria that you've been exposed to, but you're adapted to, but they haven't yet. And there is no transition, okay? And so this is, somebody wrote to me from Vietnam and said, you really have to stop with this anti-vax thing. And I'm like, oh, getting a vaccine is going to do this and do that. And really now I understand because people, refugees from another country trying to escape war and oppression and death, they have to assimilate to a new society that has so many different bacteria and pathogens because of the fact that we have weak people from different areas bringing different things, different data. And so you have to transition. But now we are seeing an ignorance of the human body, and we're seeing people actively harming themselves, whether it's vaping or cannabis or drugs. They're actively weakening their body, making them more susceptible to the pandemics. And then this is where the reset's going to happen. But it's already happening, but it's not like so dramatic like you're seeing in these documentaries about the bubonic plague. It's being filtered through the CDC because they're trying to get a hold of it, got to get on top of it before it becomes an actual issue. And they're trying to now take strains from like the Ebola virus that is prevalent and will be very strong in a body that has a weakness, because when the body has a weakness and they are spewing out mucus, they are communicable and they just strengthen that virus. So that's why the pandemic happened in Europe. It was because people did not have a layer of protection. They weren't quarantined. It was just out there. And every single time that virus traveled to another human, that human strengthened it and then gave it to another human who strengthened it. And that's how pandemics happen. Okay. And so now, and so now I'm seeing people saying the CDC is evil. And I was saying it too. I'm telling you, coming from a conspiracy, total ignorant mindset to now finally realizing, and the reason what had me realize is because of the J juice. The Jilly juice is a transition from a very malfunctioned body to now finally a body that can be strong enough to withstand the pandemics that are out there. The vaping pandemic, the cannabis pandemic, the Ebola pandemic, all of the pandemics are basically rising up. You're seeing right now the bacteria is in the water killing children. Not all children, but the ones that are obviously weak. You're seeing that people have to stay inside because of equine encephalitis or something, some kind of encephalitis from mosquito in Michigan. Okay, people are dying from pestilence because of the weak bodies. And so now I'm seeing the voices are becoming louder. People are so scared because they have so much weakness and they don't know how to take care of it. And then they're laying blame, and they're using racism because yes, we made mistakes. America's made mistakes. The slave trade, yes, they made mistakes. And back then they did whatever they thought they needed to do, and it's no excuse, but we're not in the slave trade anymore. Now you have the ability to take your minerals and utilize them and go and spend your currency and gain more currency with your mineral reserves. Okay, but back then there were mistakes. Okay, but we should not be holding people accountable for mistakes that happened 200 or 300 years ago. But we keep looping, and this is why you see the weakness in America and the weakness in Canada. They're holding Justin Trudeau for a costume party that he was Aladdin, and he darkened his skin because that's what needed to happen for his costume. But it wasn't like he was racist. But that's what's going on, is people are so scared. They're so weak and so bitter, and they're looping, and they're also on a weak body with parasites and all these different things. They don't know how to take care of their body. They're scared of their environment. And oh my God, yes, we're seeing political upheaval. Our government is trying its best, but we're seeing, back then in the pandemic, the government was very weak. And then people lost faith in the church back then because the church couldn't stop this pandemic. We're headed into, we're already there. Okay, we're already there, you guys. So finally, we have something like the J juice that will be immune to all of these fears if you learn how to strengthen your body. Because back then they didn't have something like J juice. It was just the strong, the 1/3, like I was saying, the 1/3 of the population. Because this is the model that I'm showing you guys. Right now, this is what was the model back then. And this is the same model today. We have kids that are weak because when you reproduce, you have weak children and you have weak mothers, because mothers gave a lot of their resources to their kids and they never replenished their reserves. So you have people that are weak here, and then this is who survived. These people who plateaued and are strong, who didn't die from the pandemic, not only did they keep Europe going during that time, but they also went to America and built America up. Yes, on the backs of certain people. However, that is history, and now we are in a new time, a new era. We don't need to repeat history, and we can create something new. But the ones that also died is then the elderly and the immunocompromised, the drug addicts. Okay, so the children and the elderly and the immunocompromised are going to, and that's like, when you think about it, that's 1/3. That's 1/3 of the population. Well, actually, it's 2/3. 1/3 actually would probably survive if we ever had a major one, but the CDC is not going to allow it to happen. Okay, the CDC is going to get on top of strains that are decimating villages. They're going to go in and figure out what the hell is going on, and then they go and patent those strains. That way they can create an antidote. They can create a vaccine, a very weakened version of it, and then that's how you transition. So when the Ebola virus does come to American soil, because somebody escaped the quarantine who had a very aggressive virus of the Ebola virus, the aggressive strain, we won't die. But the ones that are anti-vaxxers, the ones that are drug addicts, the ones that are not doing J-juice, they will succumb to a pandemic, because Earth and the universe will always keep a balance. And so the ones that are activists, that are racist, pissed off from the past, they're not going to trust the government. They're not going to trust authority. They're going to promote anarchy, and they are not immune to the viruses. The ones that don't understand why things exist to begin with and then try to bridge the gap, those are the people that are going to succumb to the new pandemic. And it's already happening. Okay, you guys, are not going to like see the dramatic devastation. No, you'll just transition nicely into the death process. You will smoke yourself out of existence. And that's what's going on. People are smoking themselves out of existence. No, it's not going to be like an aggressive, just a hemorrhaging like that happened in the bubonic, because it's a buboes type of parasite that weakened their capillaries, and their lymph nodes, I think the one on their neck, got enlarged, and then it weakened their capillaries, so they just started bleeding profusely. No different than the Ebola virus, actually. Or they're not that, they're very similar. And so we have figured out a way to deal with these pandemics, and this is why people are such proponents for pot, such proponents for a specific type of drugs, because they would rather soften the blow of an actual aggressive disease. That when you get cancer, that's like a pandemic, that's like the bubonic plague, but then we have modern medicine to then soften the blow and maybe buy you a few more years, but you're already on that death trajectory. But however, we're actually reproducing weaker children. Every generation, they become weaker and they're glitching, and all the politics then creates just major extremists. So we are right there, but in a different way, and in modern medicine and everything, in our current day today, we have softened the blow of the pandemics, but they're still here. Pandemics are here. Now, how you survive them is based upon your ability to adapt to the environment. And if you're afraid of vaccines and you're not doing J-juice, see ya. It was nice knowing you. If you're smoking shit ton of pot because you think that that's your right and it's so healthy, see ya, bye. I'm serious. Pot lowers your immune resistance. Pot weakens your already sustained weaknesses. It actually accelerates and it enhances your inability to adapt and be open to different cultures. Seriously, because there are certain groups that will totally adopt the pot world, and they will blame other races and other cultures for their position in the world. When all of you have every possibility to raise yourself up to your own expectation. But people have very low expectations of themselves, and so they're only going up this far, and then they blame people for why it is they're not going up this far. The pot does that. It stagnates you. It stagnates your possibility. And then you loop and loop and loop and loop and loop. Drug addicts do that. Drug addicts will succumb to the pandemic. And look at California. How much homeless? You know that Trump was just over there, and he was saying that he's going to charge California for polluting the ocean and polluting the environment. I'm just like, oh Jesus. But yeah, I mean, I haven't been back to California, San Francisco in a long ass time. I have no desire to go back to San Francisco. I have no desire to go back to LA. I mean, I'll visit my parents occasionally in Orange County, but I am not going to San Francisco. The homeless are already bad whack when I was in the 80s. The homeless are now, they're at an exponential level now. And then pestilence and then pandemics will happen from the homeless population. I can already see it now where California is going to be the epicenter. And it's going to be and that's probably why they're doing mandatory vaccines, because they have a population that's anti-vax, completely ignorant of their body, and you have a homeless population. That's a recipe for a freaking disaster. You realize that? And then we have California trying to get out of California, coming into Ohio and bringing all their pestilence to Ohio. So you better be strong. If not, you're going to succumb to I mean, right now the pandemics are manageable right now, but I'm seeing my friends are going to the ER for cellulitis, for, all these different health issues. And yeah, they have a distrust of biotech, but they don't realize where biotech came to begin, why they existed to begin with. People don't know their history or why things exist to begin with. And if you don't know why vaccines exist to begin with, if you don't know why biotech existed to begin with, if you don't know why Monsanto and GMO existed to begin with, then you will be forever ignorant, playing up your fear, no different than the people back in the 1300s blaming different cultures and their government for a virus that nobody had control over. Okay? And so yeah, so those of you that are doing the J juice, just sit back and watch all of your activist friends. Sit back and watch all of your political friends. And then you just watch their progression in life. You watch, oh, I had to go to the ER. Oh, I hate the government and I hate this. I'm going to go smoke my ganja and do this. And oh my God, now I have to go to the hospital and get this. And so people who are like so anti-government, anti-vax, anti-chemtrails, get an abscess in their tooth, and now they have to go to modern medicine to go then take that swelling down. So you're eventually going to go back into the system. Those of you who are anti-vaccine, anti-government, and you're not doing J-juice, you're eventually going to go back to your government, because you know that there was a place for them to begin with. There was a reason why modern medicine was around to begin with. There's a reason why biotech and vaccines were around to begin with. And if you can't recognize that, see you later. It was nice knowing you. I'm watching you. The time's ticking away, and pandemics and the messages of the universe. And now we have this anti-vax population that are going to strengthen these strains of the measles, chickenpox, the flu. And no matter what, I'm going to be fine, because I'm drinking the J juice and I am strengthening all of my 11 different systems. And already people are coming down with the flu and the colds. It's already happening. I hear somebody on the phone from, my roofer is already coming down with a cold. I'm like, are you okay? Because I hear him like go not gasping, but like all stuffed up. And I'm like, are you sick? He's like, yeah, I'm sick. I'm like, oh Lord, here we go. But I mean, I'm not worried about it. Okay. So, whatever. But we're already here. History is repeating itself. And so I posted screenshots of some of the articles, and then I posted the whole article with all of the paragraphs that talk about the political aspect of the bubonic plague. And then also too, when and that's why the Daigle report said that 1/3 of the US is going to be left. Like the Daigle report actually projected in like 2014 or so that in 2025 we're going to have 1/3 of the population still be standing. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, that 2025 is going to have 100 million people instead of 300 million in the US. But if that ever happens, right now, at this point, after the bubonic plague, there was a recession. And then eventually people were prosperous because there's less people that they had to compete with, more opportunity. Okay? So, I mean, resets happen for a reason. It's Earth and the universe keeping a balance. And you can play into your politics and the fear of the chemtrails and the fear of the government and a fear of your environment, or you learn how to adapt to the changes. Because yes, there was climate change even back in the 1300s. Why we have strata of different things that happen, like when you actually do like those tube things where they look and examine all the different minerals and the ash and all this stuff that happened. They see that, yeah, volcanoes happened during this time. There was a flood that happened this time. I mean, I'm part of a Tartaria group that they talk about the mud flows and then the giants of the past. And so, yes, there was a lot of resets that happened, and also climate and the geological movements also impacted the human population. And then the human population impacted the human population, okay? So you have to learn how to adapt. And if you can't adapt, guess what? Bye-bye. Bye. Nice knowing you, and you're going to leave me more room to move around in and leave me, more opportunity to make some money or whatever. That's fine. Some people, when they look at they're like, oh, I hate the cell phones and they're so horrible. And I say, well, it's a massive data reset. It's a massive data upload. Right now, we are embarking on a massive data upload. And if you don't keep up on the data that's going on, whether it's a jelly juice or anything else, I don't care what it is that you're studying, but if you don't keep up, then you're going to be left behind. And then some person says, oh, I don't want the massive upload. I'm going to go to heaven. I don't want to be part of this world anymore. Bye. So people are taking themselves out of existence voluntarily. Okay, I'm not going to convince you to stay on this earth. I'm not. People are drugging themselves out of existence. I'm not going to convince you to get off your pot. I'm not going to convince you to get off your drugs, off of your pills, power supplements, and detoxes. I'm not. You guys will voluntarily take yourself out of existence. Because here's the thing, you have access to my information. If you choose not to do it or explore it, then you have chosen. You can't blame the government. You can't blame the environment, because you have access to actually balance out your environment to adapt to your atmosphere, to your community. And if you don't do that, that's on you. It ain't on me. You can't blame the JJs why you died, because you ain't even doing it. So yes, history is repeating stuff. And I knew, because humans are predictable. When you think about how similar we are to each other, even in different cultures. We bleed the same, we react to the same stimulus. Okay? We're not that, and we weren't that different today than we were back in the 1300s. The same things like, oh yeah, it's God doing this, and oh yeah, it's this doing this, and it's their fault, and the Jews' fault, and this fault. And no, the poor Jews are getting a bad rap every single time something bad happens, because somebody has to blame, or they're blaming another culture. Okay, weak people blame somebody else for their misfortunes. And it's no different back then. And then back in even World War II, they were blaming the Jews and blaming people for the misfortunes. And it's no different back then in 1300 to the 1940s to even today. So you blame the jelly juice, you blame, the government, Monsanto, you blame the chemtrails, you blame whatever. You are no different than those that did that stuff and then persecuted and then genocided. I'm serious. That's no different than what people are doing and reacting to their environment because they never held responsible, because they didn't know. So back then, ignorance was a justification. But in today's society, ignorance is not an excuse. With the amount of access we have to information, ignorance is not an excuse. So if you happen to pass away in our society, it's because you chose to. And it was easier to pass away and blame than it is to actually face the pain of the sins of the father, as well as the sins of the mother, and what you do today, and then also the future triggers. So yes, so whatever. See you later, bye.